It began with a single letter in my mailbox, one that almost made me choke on my morning coffee. My usual HOA fees for Brentford Estate, which I could barely afford as it was, had tripled to $1,500 a month, effective immediately. Worse yet, the person behind the shocking hike was none other than our self-proclaimed benevolent HOA president, Karen McKay, who'd been strutting around in a brand-new luxury car allegedly bought with our community's money. Could it be just a coincidence? Or was there a far darker scheme lurking beneath her polished exterior and forced smile? Here's the kicker. I wasn't just any homeowner. I'd quietly been hired as the new external auditor for Brentford Estate, something Karen had no clue about. And if my instincts were correct, her entire empire was about to collapse. The only question was, how many more victims would she crush before I blew the whistle? Trust me, you've never seen an HOA story quite like this one. Stay tuned, because by the end, you'll see how a single piece of paper can bring down the mightiest tyrant. And you won't believe the final twist that took all of us by surprise. Before we jump into this roller coaster of shady invoices, secret meetings, and jaw-dropping betrayals, we need your help to keep this channel alive. Smash that like button if corrupt HOAs drive you crazy. Drop us a comment below telling us where you're watching from. It means the world to our small but growing community. And hit that subscribe so you never miss another wild story of justice, revenge, and unmasking fraud. All right, let's dive in and see how Karen McKay's twisted kingdom fell apart piece by piece. I'd lived in Brentford Estate for 5 peaceful years. Sure, the lawns were always meticulously trimmed, and the neighbors were mostly polite. But behind the white picket fences, there was always a sense that someone was watching your every move, waiting for you to slip up so they could slap you with a violation notice. And that someone was always Karen McKay. Karen, the self-appointed queen of Brentford Estate, thrived on rules and punishments. She ruled the HOA with an iron grip, doling out fines like a school principal handing out detention slips. She made herself the center of every HOA meeting, and her word was practically law. I should have known something was off when Karen cruised through the neighborhood in a brand new Tesla, her ever-present smug grin even wider than usual. The sleek, pearl-white car gleamed in the morning sun, its presence a glaring contradiction to what she had just told us days before. "We're in dire financial straits," she had declared at the last HOA meeting, her voice heavy with feigned concern. "We need everyone's cooperation to keep Brentford Estate running smoothly." Dire financial straits? The words echoed in my mind as I stared at the new HOA fee notice in my hands that morning. $1,500 a month, a staggering increase from our usual $300. A lump formed in my throat as I read and reread the letter, hoping I had misread it somehow. There was no breakdown, no justification, just a vague mention of urgent community improvements. But what improvements? No new projects had been announced. No repairs had been discussed. The more I stared at the notice, the angrier I became. Then, as if the universe itself had decided I needed a push, my phone buzzed. An email notification lit up my screen, and I swiped to open it. Subject, confirmation. Brentford Estate, audit assignment. I froze. This was the moment. For months I had been in talks to be assigned as Brentford Estate's external auditor. It was a process handled quietly, kept under wraps to ensure no tampering would occur before the official review began. And now the timing couldn't have been more perfect. A slow smile spread across my face. It was as if fate had delivered the perfect weapon into my hands at the exact moment I needed it. Peering out my window, my breath hitched. Karen was kneeling near my flower beds, snapping pictures on her phone. My heart pounded. She had left me a friendly note the week before, calling my rose garden unsightly. This, despite the fact that I had just won a local gardening prize. I clenched my jaw as I watched her zoom in on my flower beds, probably preparing yet another bogus violation notice. I stormed out onto the porch, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Enjoying the view, Karen?" She didn't even flinch. Slowly, she lowered her phone and straightened up, turning to face me with that same condescending smirk she always wore. "Oh, hello." Her tone was syrupy sweet, but her eyes gleamed with arrogance. "I was just documenting a few issues. HOA regulations are very clear about maintaining visual harmony in the neighborhood. I folded my arms. Is that so? Because I seem to recall my roses winning an award last month. Karen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Well, awards are one thing, but HOA compliance is another. We can't have Brentford Estate looking like a mismatched jungle now, can we? My fingers curled into fists at my sides. Funny how you're so concerned about compliance when the HOA suddenly needs $1,500 a month from each of us with no explanation. For the first time, Karen's smugness wavered. It was a fraction of a second, but I saw it. A flicker of something. Nervousness, guilt. But she recovered quickly. Oh, don't be dramatic. These things happen. Community upkeep is expensive. I took a slow step forward. Is that why you're driving a brand new Tesla? Her face darkened. Excuse me? You said we were in dire financial straits. I gestured toward the car parked in her driveway. And yet somehow, you had enough to upgrade to a luxury vehicle. Seems a little suspicious, don't you think? Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't owe you an explanation. I smiled coldly. No, but you owe one to the entire neighborhood. And lucky for them, I'm now the official external auditor for Brentford Estate, so I think I'll be getting those answers real soon. Her eyes widened. This time, she couldn't hide her reaction. For the first time since she took over, Karen McKay looked afraid, and I savored every second of it. I began digging into the community's records, rummaging through dusty folders in the underused HOA office. The place reeked of neglect, with files scattered haphazardly, some pages yellowing from age, others suspiciously pristine. It was shocking how disorganized everything was, or maybe it was a deliberate mess to hide the truth. As I flipped through documents, my stomach twisted. This wasn't just poor bookkeeping. It was fraud, carefully concealed under layers of bureaucratic incompetence. The first red flag, suspicious landscaping invoices. Over and over, I found repeated charges to McKay and Associates Landscaping, a firm that had no actual business address, no website, no phone number, just a P.O. box in another county. A deeper online search hinted that it was owned by none other than Karen's cousin. Then there were the sky-high security bills, a $50,000 invoice for a new, state-of-the-art security system. That would have been great if anybody had actually seen one installed. No cameras, no alarms, no upgrades, just a chunk of money disappearing into thin air. And the non-existent tree removals. A staggering $30,000 billed for cutting down hazardous trees. But satellite images of the neighborhood showed the same number of trees from years ago to today. Not a single tree had been removed. It all started making sense when I thought about Karen's sudden lifestyle change. Just a few months ago, she had lost her day job at the real estate firm. I remembered overhearing hushed conversations at the community meetings, how the company had let her go under unusual circumstances. Yet now she was flaunting a brand new Tesla, dripping in designer clothes, and orchestrating major home renovations. Where was all this money coming from? That same day, I saw Miss Morgan outside her home, her frail hands clutching a letter. Her face was ghostly pale. She'd lived in Brentford Estate since its founding, almost 40 years. She was part of the heart of this community. When I approached, her lips trembled. "Miss Morgan, is everything okay?" She hesitated before handing me the letter, her fingers shaking. I read it, my heart sinking. A new $1,500 mandatory community improvement fee. I can't afford this, she whispered. Her voice cracked, as if saying the words out loud made them more real. I live on a fixed income. I barely make enough to cover food and my medications. How can I pay this? Anger bubbled inside me. Karen knew this. She knew people like Miss Morgan couldn't afford ridiculous fees, and she didn't care. What happens if you don't pay? I asked, already dreading the answer. Tears welled in Miss Morgan's eyes. Karen threatened to put a lien on my house if I miss a single payment. That was it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just minor corruption. It was full-scale extortion. Things only got darker from there. Later that day, I found Isaac, the local handyman, pacing outside his truck, his face red with frustration. "They're fining me," he muttered, shaking his head. "Karen says I parked my truck illegally while repairing Miss Morgan's roof. I've parked in this same spot for years. Now, suddenly, it's a violation? Meanwhile, as Isaac was being threatened with fines, Karen's backyard was bustling with contractors. Men in hard hats worked tirelessly on a lavish stone fountain, its price tag undoubtedly paid with the very fees she was extorting from the community. The hypocrisy was suffocating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, surrounded by stacks of fraudulent invoices, legal threats, and accounts of intimidation. This wasn't just Karen being greedy. This was an organized machine funneling thousands of dollars into her pockets while crushing the very people she was supposed to serve, and it had to stop. I took a deep breath and gathered the evidence I had compiled. Every invoice, every suspicious expense, every story of threatened homeowners. This was enough to spark real consequences. I didn't need to call anyone. The truth was powerful enough on its own. I needed solid evidence, enough to blow this scandal wide open. Karen had built a fortress of lies, but every fortress had cracks. So I decided to confront the mountain of boxes labeled old records in the HOA basement. The place reeked of mildew, like secrets left to rot. The dim light flickered overhead as I rifled through decades of paperwork, each file yellowed and brittle with age. Half the boxes were mislabeled or missing crucial statements, an obvious attempt at burying past misdeeds. Just as frustration began to claw at my resolve, I found something that made my heart race. A printed email chain between Karen and Sarah Pierce, the HOA's treasurer and Karen's closest ally. The subject line? Reallocation of unused funds. My pulse pounded as I scanned the exchanges. Karen: Sarah, we need to move the leftover funds from last quarter. Just put them under special projects. No one checks those. Sarah: Are you sure? We already adjusted last month's financials. If someone looks closely... Karen: No one's looking. Trust me, just do it. Sarah: Okay, I'll shift $14,000. But we need a paper trail for the audits. What should I list as the reason? Karen: Community enhancement, just vague enough to satisfy the busybodies. No official approval, no budget line item. This was theft, bold and reckless. Karen wasn't just enforcing arbitrary rules. She was siphoning money from the community she claimed to protect. I snapped photos of the emails, my hands shaking. This was my smoking gun. But the next morning, a new problem arose. I woke to 3 violation notices pinned to my door, their red ink glaring against the pale morning light. The reasons were laughably petty. Garbage can left out too long. I had taken the bin out exactly 20 minutes before pickup. Rose garden exceeding official height limits. My roses, which had been the same height for years, were suddenly an issue. Unauthorized porch light, the same porch light fixture I'd had for 5 years, now deemed non-compliant. I stared at the papers in disbelief, a slow smirk creeping across my face. This wasn't about rules. This was Karen sending a message. Stop digging, or else. My fingers clenched around the notices, the cheap paper crinkling under my grip. She thought intimidation would work, that I'd fold, like the countless others who had suffered under her reign of petty tyranny. She was wrong. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I detailed each violation, showing the timestamps, the unchanged height of my roses, the identical porch light that had been there for years. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd expose every single one of her moves. Then, I did something she didn't expect. I walked right up to her house and rang the doorbell. Karen opened the door, her smile dripping with artificial sweetness. Oh, morning! Everything all right? I held up the violation notices. Want to explain these? Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Just standard community enforcement. Nothing personal. I let out a low chuckle. Nothing personal. Sure, Karen. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something I'd never seen before. Fear in Karen Victor's eyes. She had ruled this neighborhood with an iron grip, but now she was the one who had something to lose, and I was just getting started. Just when I thought I had enough to expose Karen, a bigger twist landed in my lap. A letter arrived from the State Housing Authority, announcing an upcoming external audit. This was in addition to mine, and it could blow Brentford Estate's finances wide open. Why the sudden interest? Later that evening, I found out that Mr. Rodriguez, a soft-spoken retiree who once taught at the local high school, had tipped off the state. His grandson was a journalist investigating corrupt HOAs. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one on Karen's trail. But with more eyes on Brentford Estate, Karen doubled down on her intimidation. She orchestrated a bizarre midnight inspection spree. Footage from my security camera caught her and Sarah Pierce rummaging through neighbors' yards, armed with clipboards. By sunrise, half the neighborhood woke up to brand new violation notices. It was an act of desperation, and it was about to backfire spectacularly. Sus. The day of the quarterly HOA meeting arrived. The community center was packed to the brim with angry homeowners. Karen stood at the podium wearing a designer blazer and her usual forced smile. Next to her was Sarah, rifling through papers with trembling hands. Karen began with a slideshow of necessary improvements, each carrying a bloated price tag that made the room gasp. When she finally tried to introduce a motion to lock in the $1,500 HOA fees, Miss Morgan rose from her seat, voice shaking with anger. "Explain to me how you're building a fountain in your yard while I can't afford groceries?" The tension was suffocating. People demanded answers. Karen stammered about democratic processes and overwhelming expenses. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, badge in hand. "I'm Chris, Brentford Estate's newly appointed external auditor. I have some documentation to share." At first, Karen tried to cut me off, but the crowd was hungry for the truth. I connected my laptop to the projector, and the first slide showed a suspicious invoice from McKay and Associates Landscaping. I highlighted how the charges repeated month after month with no actual work done. I followed with more damning slides. Bank transfers to a personal account under the name KM Solutions. Email snippets discussing hush-hush arrangements with her family members. Before and after satellite photos revealing zero changes to the land for the so-called tree removals. The room erupted. People shouted about refunds, demanded Karen's immediate resignation, and threatened legal action. Karen lunged for the laptop, face red with rage. "You have no right!" But ironically, the police officer at the back of the room definitely had the right. The State Housing Authority had also sent reps who were now stepping forward, ready to escort Karen out if needed. Just as I thought it couldn't get any more chaotic, Sarah Pierce grabbed the mic. She started weeping and blaming everything on Karen, insisting she was forced to sign those invoices. Karen shrieked back at her, calling her a traitor. The scene was absolute pandemonium. You'd think with all the evidence, Karen's downfall was guaranteed, but she had one last trick up her sleeve. Early the next morning, half a dozen neighbors, including me, woke up to find our cars towed away overnight. Yellow paint lined the curbs that had previously been legal parking. Frantic phone calls revealed that Karen had changed the parking regulations at the stroke of midnight, forging an emergency board vote. The towing company was owned by Karen's cousin, another family link. We'd each have to pay $500 to get our vehicles back. Some neighbors panicked, but others were furious. The fiasco triggered something we hadn't seen before: true unity. People banded together, sharing phone recordings, text messages, copies of old regulations. Even teenagers chipped in with phone-captured footage of Karen sneaking around. Mr. Rodriguez and his journalist grandson wrote an expose that went viral on local social media, prompting coverage from local news channels. Suddenly, cameras and reporters swarmed Brentford Estate, filming Karen's every move. Now thoroughly cornered, Karen started making wild accusations. She claimed I was embezzling HOA money, though no evidence existed. Accused Miss Morgan of forging documents. Absurd, given Miss Morgan could barely navigate email. Threatened to sue every homeowner for defamation. But the more she panicked, the more she exposed herself. She even left a threatening voicemail on my phone, forgetting I had it set to record automatically. Let's just say the transcript didn't make her look good in front of the judge. The night before Karen's big reckoning, I was reviewing all my files, videos, photos, emails, bank statements, when my doorbell rang. It was Gabriel, a quiet, unassuming neighbor who lived a few streets over. He handed me a flash drive, whispering, "I found this in the HOA office dumpster." On it was the smoking gun, an audio recording of Karen instructing a contractor to inflate invoices and funnel the difference back to her personal account. Clear as day. The next morning, we held a final emergency HOA meeting, this time with local news cameras rolling and a handful of uniformed police present. The tension in the air was electric. I started by calmly playing the audio. Karen's voice was unmistakable. Add another $10,000 to the invoice and deposit it into my KM Solutions account. Make sure the paper trail looks legit. I don't want these fools suspecting a thing. The room collectively gasped. That was all the authorities needed. Karen tried to bolt for the exit, but two officers stepped in front of her. She shrieked, "You can't do this! I built this community!" But Brentford Estate had finally awakened. Neighbors cheered as the officers cuffed her. Meanwhile, Sarah Pierce tearfully turned over hundreds of pages of documents, hoping for a reduced sentence. It was a stunning end to Karen's reign. The aftermath was large. Miss Morgan no longer lives in fear of losing her home. She even got a partial refund for the exorbitant fees. Mr. Rodriguez and his grandson helped push new legislation for stricter oversight of HOAs statewide. The entire Brentford Estate Board was replaced with honest folks, reducing monthly fees back to $300 and promising open financial statements. I was lauded as the community's hero, but honestly, I just felt relief knowing the neighborhood could finally breathe. The people of Brentford Estate were free from her tyranny, and that was victory enough. That's the story of how I, Chris, took down the most corrupt HOA president in Brentford Estate history and set my neighborhood free. If you love these tales of justice, please hit like, subscribe, so you never miss a twisted tale of HOA madness again. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories. And remember, knowledge is power. Keep your eyes open, document everything, and don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. You never know. You might be the hero your community desperately needs. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.